This first story was sent to me by a viewer who wishes to remain anonymous. It takes place in the summer of 2019, on a stretch of highway cutting through the Mojave Desert. Jason was driving from Los Angeles to visit family in Albuquerque. Being a college student on a tight budget, he decided to make the 12-hour drive overnight to avoid paying for a motel. He left LA around 8 p.m., figuring he'd arrive by morning. Around 2 a.m., he was deep in the desert on a particularly isolated stretch of I-40. The last gas station he'd passed was over 70 miles back, and his phone showed no service. That's when he heard a strange rattling from his engine, followed by his temperature gauge rapidly climbing into the red. Before he could even pull over, his 2008 Honda Civic began sputtering, then died completely. He coasted to the shoulder and sat there, the silence of the desert night suddenly overwhelming after hours of road noise and music. Jason wasn't particularly knowledgeable about cars, but he popped the hood anyway, using his phone's flashlight to look for any obvious problems. Steam hissed from the radiator, and he knew enough not to touch it. He decided to wait for it to cool down before adding water. That's when he realized just how dark it was. The moon was just a sliver, and without city lights, the darkness felt physical, pressing in from all sides. The only illumination came from his phone's rapidly draining battery and the distant stars. According to Jason, he'd been sitting there for about 30 minutes, considering whether to start walking to find help, when headlights appeared in the distance. Relief washed over him as a pickup truck slowed down and pulled over about 50 feet ahead of his car. The truck was an older model, maybe from the 90s, dark in color with some rust spots visible even in the dim light. Jason couldn't make out the driver through the tinted rear window, but he was just grateful someone had stopped. He got out and started walking toward the truck when the driver's door opened. A man stepped out, but remained standing by his open door. Something about the man immediately set off alarm bells in Jason's mind. He was tall and gaunt, wearing dirty jeans and a flannel shirt despite the warm night. But it was his face that disturbed Jason the most, pale, with deep-set eyes that seemed to absorb the darkness around them. "Car trouble?" the man called out, his voice strangely flat. Jason stopped about 20 feet from the truck and explained his situation, asking if the man had a cell phone with service or could give him a ride to the next town. The man just stared at him for an uncomfortably long time before saying, "I got some tools in the back. Let me take a look at your car." Something in his gut told Jason to be cautious. He thanked the man but said he'd already called for roadside assistance and they'd be there soon. A lie, but one that felt necessary in the moment. The man's expression didn't change. "No service out here for miles," he said, taking a step forward. "Get in my truck. I'll take you somewhere safe." The way he emphasized the word safe made Jason's skin crawl. That's when he noticed something else. There was no sound of an idling engine from the truck. It was completely silent, as if it had been turned off, yet the headlights remained on. Jason took a step back toward his car, saying he'd rather wait for help. The man took another step forward, now fully away from his truck. In the dim light, Jason could see dark stains on the man's clothes that looked disturbingly like dried blood. "I insist," the man said, reaching behind his back as if to grab something from his waistband. Jason turned and ran back to his car, fumbling with his keys before locking himself inside. Through the rearview mirror, he could see the man walking slowly toward him. Jason frantically tried to start his car, praying for a miracle. To his shock, the engine turned over. Whatever problem had caused it to overheat seemed temporarily resolved, or perhaps never as serious as he'd feared. Not questioning his luck, Jason slammed the car into drive and peeled away, tires spitting gravel. In his mirror, he could see the man standing in the middle of the road, watching him drive away. But what truly terrified him was what happened next. As Jason watched, the man simply faded away, like an image dissolving into the darkness. The truck's headlights flickered and went out. Jason drove non-stop to the next town, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. At a 24-hour gas station, with his hands still shaking, he asked the clerk if strange things ever happened on that stretch of highway. The clerk gave him a knowing look and explained that Jason wasn't the first to have such an encounter. That section of highway had seen numerous disappearances over the years, solo travelers who were never seen again. Local legend told of a man who'd been murdered by a hitchhiker out there in the 1970s and who now appeared to stranded motorists, luring them away from safety. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, Jason's story serves as a reminder that some of the most dangerous predators, supernatural or human, hunt in places where help is far away and witnesses are few. This next account comes from a national park ranger who worked in the desert regions of Arizona. For professional reasons, she asked me to refer to her only as Sarah. In the summer of 2021, Sarah was assigned to a remote area of the park, responsible for trail maintenance and visitor safety. The region was known for its unique geological features, including several cave systems that were off-limits to the public due to unstable conditions and the presence of protected bat colonies. One evening, as Sarah was wrapping up her shift, she received a call about a possible missing hiker. A rental car had been parked at one of the trailheads for over 24 hours, with no sign of its owner. The hiker, a man in his 30s named Michael, had checked in at the visitor center 2 days prior, but hadn't been seen since. Sarah joined the search team early the next morning. They split into groups to cover more ground, with Sarah and another ranger named Tom assigned to check some of the restricted areas, including the caves, in case Michael had ignored the warning signs. By midday, they'd reached one of the larger cave entrances. The danger, "Do not enter" sign had been moved aside, and fresh footprints led inside. Sarah radioed their findings to the search coordinator, who instructed them to follow the tracks but proceed with extreme caution. The temperature dropped noticeably as they entered the cave, a welcome relief from the desert heat. The initial passage was wide enough for them to walk side by side, their powerful flashlights illuminating the limestone walls. But about 200 feet in, the cave narrowed to a tight corridor that forced them to proceed single file. The footprints continued, showing that Michael had ventured deep into the restricted area. Sarah and Tom followed the trail for nearly half an hour, descending deeper into the earth. The air became stale and damp, with an unpleasant smell that Sarah initially attributed to bat guano. The passage eventually opened into a larger chamber with several tunnels branching off in different directions. Sarah swept her flashlight across the ground, trying to locate Michael's footprints among the rocky floor. That's when the beam caught something reflective in the corner, a water bottle with a hiking permit attached to it. It belonged to Michael. Next to the bottle was a backpack, its contents spilled across the cave floor. Energy bars, a map, extra clothes, but there was no sign of Michael himself. Tom radioed their find to base while Sarah examined the scene more carefully. The backpack appeared to have been torn open rather than simply dropped, with long gashes in the fabric that looked disturbingly like claw marks. Tom's radio crackled with static as he tried to report their position, eventually giving up due to the poor reception. "We need to check those tunnels," he said, pointing to the 3 passages leading away from the chamber. "But let's stay together." They chose the leftmost tunnel first, which sloped downward at a steep angle. The smell grew stronger as they descended, no longer just the ammonia scent of bat droppings, but something muskier and more primal. Sarah had worked in wilderness areas for over a decade and had encountered everything from bears to mountain lions, but this smell was unfamiliar and deeply unsettling. About 50 feet down the tunnel, Sarah's flashlight beam caught something on the ground. It was a hiking boot, the same brand she'd seen on the gear list Michael had submitted with his permit. Inside the boot was a sock, stained dark, with what appeared to be dried blood. Tom reached for his radio again, despite the poor reception, while Sarah scanned the tunnel ahead. Her light revealed something on the wall about 10 feet further down. Handprints, small and precise, pressed into the soft clay of the cave wall. They weren't human hands. The fingers were too long, the palms too narrow, and there were dozens of them at various heights, as if multiple creatures of different sizes had left their marks. Sarah was about to point them out to Tom when they both heard it, a soft, chittering sound from somewhere deeper in the tunnel. It wasn't bats. The sound had an almost language-like quality, a rapid series of clicks and whistles that rose and fell in distinct patterns. Then came another sound, a human voice, weak and trembling, calling for help. Tom immediately started forward, but Sarah grabbed his arm. "Wait," she whispered. Something wasn't right. The voice sounded like it was coming from much further down the tunnel than their lights could reach, yet it was perfectly clear, as if the speaker were standing right beside them. The voice called again, this time adding a name. "Tom? Is that you, Tom? Please, I'm hurt. I need help." Tom froze. "How does it know my name?" he whispered. "We never mentioned our names on the radio." The chittering sounds grew louder, seeming to come from multiple directions now. Sarah's flashlight began to flicker, the beam weakening. Tom's light did the same. Within seconds, they were in near total darkness, with only the faint glow from their failing flashlights illuminating a few feet around them. "We need to leave," Sarah said, already backing away. "Now." They turned and began moving as quickly as they could toward the main chamber, guided by the dim emergency light on Sarah's radio. Behind them, the chittering sounds grew into a frenzy, punctuated by what Sarah described as the sound of too many legs moving across stone. As they reached the main chamber, Sarah spotted movement in the other tunnels. Pale, elongated figures withdrawing into the darkness, too quick to be clearly seen. She and Tom didn't hesitate, running for the exit tunnel as their flashlights sputtered back to life. The journey out seemed to take forever, both of them fighting the urge to look back at the sounds of pursuit that seemed to fade and then return throughout their escape. When they finally emerged into the harsh desert sunlight, they immediately called for backup and a more extensive search team. Despite a week-long search involving dozens of personnel, cave specialists, and even rescue dogs, Michael was never found. The official report listed him as missing, presumed dead from a caving accident. But after what she experienced, Sarah requested a transfer to another park the following month. She hasn't entered a cave since. The most disturbing part, in the years since this incident, 3 more hikers have disappeared in the same region. Each time, rangers found their belongings in or near cave entrances. And each time, the search dogs would track the scent to a certain point inside the caves and then refuse to go any further, no matter how their handlers urged them on. This final story comes from 2 college friends, Derek and Nick, who experienced something truly terrifying during a camping trip in the Nevada desert in the fall of 2022. The pair had been planning a weekend of off-road and camping in a remote area about 3 hours from Las Vegas. Both were experienced outdoorsmen who had explored similar terrain many times before. They packed Derek's Jeep with supplies for 3 days and headed out early Friday morning. By mid-afternoon, they had reached their destination, a secluded area surrounded by rocky hills and sparse vegetation. As they set up camp, Nick spotted what looked like an old structure on a nearby hillside. Curious, they decided to investigate before sunset. What they found was the remnants of an abandoned mining operation, a small wooden structure that had once been an office or storage building, rusted equipment scattered around, and the dark entrance to a mine shaft disappearing into the hillside. A weathered sign warned, "Danger, unstable ground, keep out." Derek, who had some interest in mining history, was fascinated. He took some photos of the site, while Nick peered cautiously into the mine entrance. The shaft appeared to go straight into the hill for about 20 feet before turning to the right, preventing them from seeing how deep it went. "We should check it out tomorrow," Nick suggested. Derek was hesitant, aware of the dangers of abandoned mines, but eventually agreed they would take a quick look, just at the entrance, in better light the next day. That night, as they sat around their campfire cooking dinner, both men noticed something odd. Despite being miles from any town or highway, they occasionally heard what sounded like faint mechanical noises coming from the direction of the mine, metallic clangs and the creak of old machinery. Probably just the wind moving those old metal parts around, Derek reasoned, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. Nick agreed, but they both found themselves glancing toward the dark hillside throughout the evening. Around midnight, as they were preparing to turn in, The noises suddenly stopped. The desert fell completely silent, not even the usual sounds of nocturnal creatures. Then, cutting through that silence, came a sound that froze both men in place. A single, clear whistle, like a signal from the direction of the mine. They waited, listening intently, but heard nothing more. Eventually, attributing the sound to some desert animal, they went to sleep in their tent. Nick woke first, around 3 a.m., needing to use the bathroom. He unzipped the tent as quietly as possible to avoid waking Derek and stepped outside. The night was clear and cold, with a bright moon illuminating the landscape. As he was returning to the tent, something caught his eye, a light flickering from the mine entrance on the hillside. It wasn't the steady beam of a flashlight or headlamp, but the warm, uneven glow of what looked like lantern light. And silhouetted against that glow, Nick could make out what appeared to be a human figure, standing at the mine entrance, looking in their direction. Nick ducked back into the tent and shook Derek awake, whispering about what he'd seen. Both men peered out from the tent flap. The figure was still there, motionless, watching their camp. Then slowly, it raised one arm and seemed to beckon to them, before turning and disappearing into the mine shaft, taking the light with it. "That's not right," Derek whispered. "Nobody should be out here, especially not in that mine at night." They debated what to do: investigate, ignore it, or pack up and leave immediately. Eventually, concerned that someone might be lost or injured, won out. They grabbed their flashlights and a first aid kit and cautiously made their way up the hillside toward the mine. As they approached the entrance, they noticed fresh footprints in the dust, a single set, leading into the mine but not coming back out. The prints looked strange, deeper at the toes, as if the person was walking on the balls of their feet. At the entrance, they called out, asking if anyone needed help. Their voices echoed down the shaft, but no answer came. Derek, still uneasy, suggested they just take a quick look inside, staying close to the entrance. Nick agreed, and they cautiously entered the shaft, their powerful flashlights cutting through the darkness. The main tunnel extended about 30 feet before turning right, just as they'd observed earlier. As they approached the bend, they smelled something odd, a mixture of sulfur and what Nick described as old meat. They rounded the corner and found themselves in a larger chamber with mining equipment still in place, an old ore cart on rusted tracks, pickaxes leaning against the wall, rotting support beams. Their flashlight beams revealed multiple tunnels leading off from this chamber. And on the far wall, something that made them both stop in their tracks. Dozens of photographs, yellowed with age, pinned to the wooden support beams. Moving closer, they saw they were photos of people, men, women, and children of various ages, dressed in styles spanning several decades. Some photos appeared to be more than 50 years old, while others looked relatively recent. Each had a date written below it in faded ink. The most recent date they could make out was just 3 months prior. As unsettling as this discovery was, what truly terrified them was what they noticed next. Many of the people in the photos were wearing hiking boots or camping gear. These weren't miners or workers, they were visitors, like themselves. Suddenly, their flashlights began to flicker simultaneously. In the momentary darkness, they heard movement from one of the side tunnels, a shuffling sound, followed by that same clear whistle they'd heard from camp. When their lights stabilized seconds later, they saw it. Standing at the entrance to one of the side tunnels was a figure that, at first glance, appeared to be a man in old-fashioned mining clothes. But as their lights fully illuminated it, they realized with horror that what they were seeing wasn't entirely human. Though it had a humanoid shape, its proportions were wrong. Arms too long, fingers too numerous, its face obscured by an old mining helmet with a lamp that suddenly flared to blinding brightness. In the harsh light, they caught glimpses of pale, almost translucent skin and too many teeth in what might have been a smile. Nick and Derek didn't wait to see more. They ran, stumbling back down the tunnel toward the entrance, the sound of rapid movement following close behind. As they burst out into the moonlight, they heard that whistle again, this time sounding almost like laughter. They didn't stop running until they reached their campsite. Throwing their gear haphazardly into the Jeep, they fled the area, driving for an hour, before they felt safe enough to pull over at a 24-hour gas station. When they finally calmed down enough to talk about what they'd seen, they decided to report it to the Bureau of Land Management, concerned that other campers might encounter the same thing. A ranger took their report politely, but seemed skeptical, mentioning that abandoned mines often contain toxic gases that can cause hallucinations. The ranger did promise to investigate, however, and a few weeks later, Nick received a call. The ranger would only say that they had found the mine and sealed it permanently due to safety concerns. When Nick pressed for more information about the photographs or the figure they'd seen, the ranger simply said, "Some things are best left buried," and ended the call. Derek and Nick have not been back to that area or any remote desert location since. But sometimes, Nick says, he still wakes in the night thinking he hears a distant whistle, calling him back to whatever waits in the darkness beneath the desert. These stories remind us that the desert's greatest danger isn't always the heat or lack of water. Sometimes, it's what hides in the vast emptiness, watching and waiting for those who wander too far from safety. If you enjoyed these true desert horror stories, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more terrifying tales. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next upload. This has been Nightmare After Dark. Sleep well, if you can.